President. Good evening, everyone. When ASA Executive Secretary Addis Ababa informed me that I was one of the recipients of the Distinguished Africanist Award, I was humbled to be selected among many colleagues who made extraordinary contribution to the field. Heartfelt thanks offered to the selection committee and those who nominated me, especially Deki and Undami. I was born and I grew up in Senegal. Arabic was the language of instruction in the environment I grew up in. When I was 3 years old, I was enrolled in a Quranic school, and had I followed the path of my parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, my career would have been that of an Islamic scholar in local theological schools. Yet I spent the last 24 years teaching in America and writing scholarly works in English. My youth in Quranic school prepared me for everything except ending my career as an emeritus professor at Harbard University. The world has changed significantly since I grew up in Senegal in the 1960s. Commenting on my trajectory, one reviewer of my book Beyond Timbuktu, part of which is autobiographical, noted that, I quote, words that some might assume to be totally separate today weave in and out each other with surprising fluidity and of hope. There are now hundreds of Senegalese and other francophone African scholars in the US Academy. One colleague noted that at Columbia University, where I taught between 2002 and 2012, there were more Senegalese tenured faculty than in any other university in the world outside Senegal. I don't think that former President Senghor, when theorizing on the civilisation universelle as the rendezvous of giving and receiving, could have predicted that in one generation, such a significant number of Senegalese intellectuals would become new Anglophones, and I'm sure that we haven't seen anything yet. In the late 1980s, I was a PhD student in a graduate program of political science, Middle Eastern and Islamic studies in France. My geographic focus was northern Nigeria, where I encountered the works of historians of West Africa. I feel very honored to be a co-recipient of the award with Professor Lovejoy, whose works on northern Nigeria are among the first that I read. The works of these historians were instrumental in provoking the shift in my research interest from comparative politics and focus on the Middle East to the history of Islam in Africa. When I was a graduate student, Islam in Africa was marginal in Islamic studies as it was in African studies. A big thank you to my mentors in the field, especially Jean Trio, David Robinson, Murray Last, the late John Van Dyck, John Baden, the late Donald Cruz O'Brien, Charles Stewart, Louis Brenner, Christian Coulon, Boubacar Bari, Martin Klein, and many others in Nigeria. When I joined Harbard University in 2012, as the inaugural holder of a chair devoted to Islam in Sub-Saharan Africa, several colleagues specializing in that field held appointment at various US universities. Building on the solid foundation of African studies established by my colleagues Jacob Olupona and Emmanuel Akempong at Harvard, my students and I initiated an Islam in Africa Occupy Harvard campaign, organizing conferences, lecture series, and many other events to place Islam in Africa as the center of Islamic studies at Harvard, and I thank the dozens of scholars who participated in the campaign by attending our conferences and symposia over the past decade. To name just a few: Rudolf Ware, Joseph Hill, Idrin Kaptej, Zakaria Ahmed Salem, Moro Nebili, Ibrahim Hassan, Zachary Wright, Alexander Thurston, Farah El Sharif, Nicolas Jude, Jelimoni Jabate, Amadou Kounate, Arman Siddiqui, Moro Nobili, Adam Smith, and Ousmane Oumar. We now have an Islam in Africa working group at the ASA, which is a significant step. I was appointed at Harvard to contribute to the study of Islam in Africa. Exposure to the works of our PhD students significantly improved my understanding of how Islam interacted with other religions and how Islam in sub-Saharan Africa connected to the other parts of the world. To cite just a few, Kimberly Wortman's work on the connections between Muslim East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, Ayodeji Ogunaike's work on the Muslim Black Atlantic, Ayodeji Ogunaike and Rudani Ogunaike's comparative work on Islam and African religion, and Norbert Litoin's research on Christianity and Islam. The closest counterpart to ASA on the African continent is CODESIA, the Council for the Study of Social Research in Africa. In 1991, Mamadou Diouf introduced me to CODESIA. Through CODESIA, I made significant connections not only with African scholars from the entire continent and various linguistic traditions, but also with other scholars from the Global South. 2 decades later at Columbia University, I was reunited with CODESIA icons such as Mahmoud Mamdani, Mamadou Diouf, and Suleiman Bashir Diagne. We continued the conversation through the Ethiopia seminar initiated by Mamdani, which provided even greater exposure to the Global South. As I retire from academia, I feel satisfied that during my career, Islam in Africa, once overlooked, is now part of Islamic studies and African studies, including ASA. In the fall of 1994, 30 years ago, I was a visiting professor at the University of Kansas, invited by my friends Leonardo Villaron and Fiona McLaughlin, who took me to the ASA annual meeting.
HK Média, le pari d'une information juste et utile, totalement indépendant, absolument véridique. HK Média est un nouvel espace animé par la volonté de contribuer à la diffusion d'une information de qualité, vraie et utile. Le Sénégal est notre site de déploiement, l'Afrique, notre priorité, le monde, notre horizon.